Before we start the podcast, just want to say thank you very much to everyone who's been supporting the Popular Front 10K campaign. We've got a week left now and we're about $2,000 out from the goal. I don't know if we'll make it, but either way, it doesn't matter. Thank you so much for supporting. If you want to support, please go to popularfront.co/10K and there'll be a link there to the Indiegogo campaign. Thanks very much. We hit 50% very quickly and we're on our way to the full amount. So thanks everybody. This is Popular Front, a podcast focused on the very niche and kind of geeky details of modern warfare with me, Jake Hanrahan. Today we're speaking to Ross Dayton. He's an independent researcher looking specifically into the militant groups in Colombia. Today he's going to be speaking about the Marxist-Leninist guerrilla movement, the FARC or FARC. They've been on a ceasefire or a peace deal with the government. Things have gone south and basically a dissident faction of the FARC recently said, look, that's it, we're going back to war, which could mean very bad things for the people living in the FARC-controlled areas of Colombia. If you like what we're doing here at Popular Front, please do consider supporting us on the Patreon. Go to patreon.com/popularfront or on the 10K campaign, popularfront.co/10K. FARC, this Marxist-Leninist militant group in Colombia, they went back to war recently, right? What is going on there?
So it isn't the FARC as a whole that's going back to war. This is a dissident group. Granted, this is the most high-profile instance of FARC dissidents, since it involves Ivan Marquez, who is the second in command of the FARC, and he was also one of the chief negotiators of the peace deal. It also features a few other important leaders, such as Jesus Santrich and El Paisa. So basically, this is a dissident group. The main FARC group has condemned, which is now a political party that has guaranteed representation in Congress. And the leader of the FARC, Rodrigo Londoño, he has condemned that video. So basically, this is a FARC dissident group. It's the most high-profile FARC dissident group to date, and it's definitely a critical threat to the peace process, but it's not a total return to war.
Okay, well then let's talk about the peace process then. What is it they're going back to war from and why? I mean, I read about the peace process and it seems to have been a bit of a disaster.
Yeah, no, it's definitely been problematic overall. So basically there's been an increased number of FARC dissidents over the past few years due to various issues. One of the main issues has been the assassination of social leaders that has occurred in various parts of Colombia. And this has been partly the result because the Colombian government hasn't been able to follow up on its part of the deal in taking over the FARC's former territories in a lot of areas. This is due to the geography and economic limitations that prevents the Colombian government from doing so. So it's kind of become a free-for-all for in many parts of Colombia between the remaining armed groups, criminal and militant groups that are still active in Colombia. As a result of the FARC peace deal and the demobilization of the FARC, there has been multiple parts of Colombia that the Colombian government hasn't been able to take full control of, and they haven't been able to guarantee security for those regions. And it's basically become a free-for-all for the FARC's former territories between various armed groups, including the ELN, which was the second largest Colombian guerrilla group. Now it's the largest. They've been expanding into those territories, and this has also benefited other groups like the EPL, which is another smaller guerrilla group, as well as paramilitary criminal groups like the Clan del Golfo and the Rastrojos that have also been expanding their territories.
Right, okay. But the government is, from what I read a few pieces. One was a really good New York Times piece last year, and it seems to me that the government have really dropped the ball here. I mean, not to excuse anything the FARC are doing, but from what I read, it seemed like the government have really fucked this up.
So I suppose you could say that in a sense. It's not necessarily that the Colombian government is entirely abandoning it. It's just that it's been a pretty contentious issue. After the Previous election, Ivan Duque, who is a right-wing political candidate, who's also known as a protege of Alvaro Uribe, who is also a right-wing president who is pretty notorious for having a heavy-handed approach for approaching the guerrillas in general, and he's also known for his opposition to the FARC peace deal. And that obviously shaked a lot of the confidence in implementing the FARC peace deal. Also, Ivan Duque, while he hasn't abandoned it completely, he has been trying to make some changes, some reforms that would make it tougher on the former FARC guerrillas. And that's created some concerns that the former FARC members will be willing to return to war or join these dissident groups that are propping up.
Right, and I read that a lot of the criminal elements have basically just started murdering FARC people, like taking over areas, turning areas that they controlled. Like, okay, the government didn't control it, but at least the FARC weren't allowing these drug dealers to just kill civilians. That's what I've been reading anyway.
Well, I mean, it's a bit more complicated than that, obviously, since the FARC itself was also involved in drug trafficking. It was the largest drug trafficking organization.
Yeah. Maybe go into all that, man, because I'm quite ignorant on the issue.
No. We definitely don't want to depict the FARC as heroes in this sense. But yeah, they did control a lot of the territory that the Colombian government wasn't able to, and they did provide some degree of law and order to some extent. And it's kind of been just kind of a free-for-all as a result of, in some parts where they demobilized. Like the parts where the Colombian government have been able to enter and take over and provide security and economic support for communities, those areas have improved as a result of the FARC peace deal, but other parts have gotten worse.
Right, and what exactly was the situation beforehand? Like, why did they need the peace process in the first place? Do you get what I mean? I know vaguely what FARC were up to, but I guess what did FARC think they were doing versus what the government don't want them doing? Because obviously they're not like, you know, we know they're involved in drug trafficking massively, but they believe that they're having this, you know, communist kind of area that they want to control and blah, blah. Like, what's the ideas?
Okay, so this has been one of the longest and most ongoing conflicts in the world. The FARC was officially founded in 1964, but it has its origins dating back over a decade before that. With communist self-defense peasant militias that had formed during a civil war period known as La Violencia. So basically, and it goes back even further than that. So the Colombian government's never held full control of all of its territory, and there's always been conflict between the elite landlords. Before that, with the Peninsulares, the Spanish colonial power, which was eventually replaced with the local Criollo elite in a lot of parts. And there's always been that tension between the landlord elites and the peasantry and the urban elites, and also between liberals and conservatives for a very long time, which ultimately resulted in that civil war I mentioned, La Violencia, that gave rise to the FARC. Eventually, it's the 70s and 80s. Drug trafficking became a very lucrative means of armed groups to collect funds and finance themselves, and it was incredibly advantageous, but at the same time, that arguably also corrupted a lot of these guerrilla groups, since they no longer had to popular support. So now they really don't have any popular support for the most part. I think most Colombians are sick of the violence at this point, regardless of their political orientation, and they don't want to return to conflict.
Sure, but I mean, I understand that they're sick of the violence, but now what? You know, in the areas where the gangs have just taken over, like, what are the government doing to stop that?
So I guess that's a bit of a complicated issue, obviously, because it varies from area to area. So Ivan Duque has made it at least a stated priority to go after the FARC dissident groups as well as the ELN, especially after the bombing in Bogota. And however, there has been a lot of accusations that he has been ignoring other issues such as the assassination of social leaders, the assassination of former FARC members, that have also resulted from the handling of the peace process. There's also issues such as land reform that were part of the FARC peace deal that haven't really been fully implemented yet either.
Right, okay. So what do you think is going to happen then now that these main dissident groups have said, like, yeah, we're going back to war?
Well, so there's actually a pretty interesting leaked document in the Colombian newspaper Semana that came up recently that involves Venezuela. So basically it's kind of this leaked document from SEBIN, which is the Venezuelan intelligence agency, basically collecting intelligence on Colombian military targets, and inside what is called a green country in that document, and basically that they would support what they call red groups to attack these targets in the case that the gray country, presumably like the United States, would come and try to intervene in Venezuela, given the situation there.
So what are the red groups exactly?
Announcement, Ivan Marquez's announcement, also ties into this, since he was calling for an alliance with the ELN, even though these were historically rival groups. So, and since the ELN has the largest presence in Venezuela, has close ties with the Venezuelan government, that seems to be kind of indicative that the Venezuelan government is employing these guerrilla groups as potentially as a proxy inside of Colombia, as well as a kind of part of its paramilitary strategy of relying on non-state armed groups inside of its own borders to control territory and implement social control on its behalf.
Right, so what are the ELN doing now then? Because they weren't a part of this peace process, right?
Right. There was a separate peace process that was even more contentious than the FARC peace process. This is mostly due to the ELN's more decentralized kind of leadership. It's more regionally based. Different fronts have more influence over and autonomy over their actions, and the fronts that have access to like drug trafficking routes or access to like the Venezuelan border, where they're able to cross over, expand their operations, and take advantage of that, have been more belligerent. So there is at least one commander of the Western War Front, Uriel, who has basically come out in support of Ivan Marquez's message. So it may be possible seeing some sort of cooperation between the Ivan Marquez's FARC dissident faction and some factions of the ELN.
Wow, so they might form like the super group of Colombian dissident militias, like.
Yeah, well, it probably won't be a super group per se. It'll probably be some loose alliance, but it's difficult to say if there'll be like how much cooperation there really will be. It's not like Venezuela like has total control of these groups. Like these groups obviously act on their own accord, on their own interests. Even within their, like I said, within the subdivisions of the group, they still act autonomously. So it's hard to see. Another interesting aspect of the video is that it did not mention any of the active FARC dissident leaders. So there's the largest FARC dissident group is called the First Front, and it's commanded by Gentil Duarte and Ivan Mordisco. So these two guys, they did not join in with the FARC peace process. They had abandoned it before it went into implementation, and they continued their armed struggle and their criminal activities after the peace process was developed. So they weren't even mentioned in the video at all, which is pretty telling. It could indicate that there might be some rivalry between who's going to be the leader of the new FARC dissident groups, since it's not like a singular organization either. There's about 31 different FARC dissident groups at this time, probably more than that. So, and there's been reports that Gentil Duarte had actually rejected Ivan Marquez's proposal to unite, kind of claiming that since they went ahead with this peace deal, they abandoned their posts.
What kind of weapons do they have then at this moment? Because a lot of the FARC turned in, but there wasn't an arms amnesty, was there?
Yeah, they did Well, a lot of the FARC did demobilize and they turned in their weapons with them, but
Oh, they did. Okay.
yeah, but there was still there's obviously cases where it's clear that they didn't turn in all the weapons, or that some groups just kept the weapons for themselves, or not everything was reported. So there's a lot of weapons and resources that they have that was unaccounted for, and that's probably being exploited by like ongoing FARC dissident groups or any other groups that may have like been able to take it over. There's also questions of like how much support they're getting from the Venezuelan government, and like as far as material support. So that's also another ongoing issue.
Well, yeah, how real is that? Maybe let's go into that, because I've read certain things. I didn't see anything concrete, but you know, you're the expert on this. What do you think? Is that real?
As in like material support, or?
Well, I know they're helping them out, but like how much, I guess?
Yeah, so at least within Venezuela, they have very close ties with the Venezuelan government, especially along the border regions. The ELN in particular is present in up to 13 states in Venezuela. And in a lot of different locations, they've been acting basically as the state itself. Like the ELN has even been involved in like social welfare programs that and food distribution programs. So they're basically administrating that at local levels, and that's an important means of like controlling local communities over there.
Right. And maybe you can go into then a little bit about the difference between the FARC and the ELN, specifically their ideology as well. That's something I think a lot of people don't quite understand, you know, certainly I don't.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, they're both Marxist-Leninist guerrillas. They both draw heavy influence from like the Cuban Revolution, from Che Guevara, from liberation theology. So they're very similar, at least ideologically. Arguably, the ELN is more ideological. And there's also a huge difference in the way they were founded. So the FARC differs a lot from the ELN in most, I would say most Marxist guerrilla groups, in that they were not like a group of middle-class intellectuals that just went to the mountains and started recruiting peasants, and then they started doing like their focal guerrilla warfare like Che Guevara and Fidel Castro did in Cuba. So as I mentioned, they have their origins in the civil war period known as La Violencia, that basically they peasants that were inspired by like the Communist Party at the time started forming their own self-defense militias and taking over like local communities like during the 1950s, and finally in the early 1960s the Colombian government stated that this was going to be a problem because they're controlling territories, obviously, and it's a communist threat right in their backyard, and the United States was also supporting of this sort of repression. And it was, so these areas is in Marquetalia. It was kind of called the Marquetalia Republic, given how much autonomy it has, like how much control they were able to enforce in these areas. And they were ultimately crushed, and the leftovers of those self-defense militias reformed themselves, and they became the FARC.
Right, and what does the FARC stand for, sorry?
Fuerzas Armadas Revolucionarias de Colombia, or the Revolutionary Armed Forces of Colombia. So that's actually another different thing. So after the FARC became a political party, it changed its name to Fuerzas Alternativas Revolucionarias del Común, like the Common Revolutionary Alternative Force, kind of like a less menacing name, although the Ivan Marquez's group, they're using the full acronym with EP at the end, which stands for Ejército del Pueblo, or People's Army, and they're using the old FARC name. So even though, like I said, Ivan Marquez doesn't represent the main FARC group, they are trying to kind of give themselves this like aura of legitimacy that they're the successor to the guerrilla warfare, the guerrilla group as the FARC. And they've also tried to like invoke like the Marquetalia Republic, and saying this is the second Marquetalia. And so it's kind of like they're trying to put themselves as a legitimate guerrilla group.
Right. And what kind of damage did they do when they were in, you know, full war against the state before the ceasefire?
Right. So yeah, this has been an ongoing conflict for decades. It's resulted in widespread like terrorist attacks, kidnappings. It was a lot of insecurity. throughout Colombia for many years, until eventually, like in the 2000s, when Álvaro Uribe became president. He took a much heavier hand, and arguably, although his response to the FARC was also heavily criticized for human rights abuses and the massacres of innocents as well, like as collateral damage. So this has been, and that was able to weaken the FARC and the ELN and other groups, although it did came at a heavy cost, and that's something that has been heavily criticized.
Right, and can you talk a little bit about the drug trafficking? Because I know that, well, I first ever found out about the FARC's drug trafficking when I was like 19, and I was reading this article about the flipping narco submarines. Like they literally hired a scientist or something, or kidnapped him, I don't know, and he was making like intricate submarines for them to smuggle coke with. You know, what's going on there? Why are they smuggling so much drugs?
Yeah, I mean that's just means of making money for them. So it's a highly lucrative business for like criminal groups in Colombia in general, not just the FARC, the paramilitary groups that were fighting alongside the government for a long time before they were dismantled. They were also heavily involved in drug trafficking. The ELN is involved in drug trafficking. It's just it's an opportunity that's just too lucrative for like armed groups to really pass up, especially in the situation in Colombia where the Colombian government's not able to enforce in every single area of its territory due to the geography. That just lends really well to these sort of operations. So it's like every single insurgent group in the world involved in some sort of like criminal activity to like fund itself or operate, and that's just taken to the extreme with Colombia.
Right, but what did they actually do as the FARC? Like, I know they're running drugs because they want to get money for weapons and whatever. What were they actually doing for these so-called revolutionary ideas that they had?
I mean, yeah, just smuggling drugs. A lot of it would go through the border. They would go through like the Pacific coast, or they would involved in production. So really kind of just the whole supply chain. Although they also had ties with like Mexican cartels and other transnational criminal groups, even like Hezbollah and things like that to some extent. Even like with like local governments, like in Peru under Fujimori, there's also some scandals with like involved with weapons deals and drug trafficking with his government, with his intelligence agency. So it was just a really really extensive drug trafficking and illicit finance campaign.
Right, but they must be doing something, you know, for the cause, as it were. Like, surely they're doing something.
Yeah, I mean, so ultimately, I think there's a lot of arguments, like basically saying that the FARC are just narco-terrorists, that they don't have a real ideology, they're just doing this as an excuse to sell drugs. In some cases, that does seem pretty plausible, but at the same time, they've been like launching this guerrilla warfare. They still train their recruits and their cadres with Marxist ideology. So some of the ideological and political goals are arguably still there, and those are obviously parts of the FARC peace deal.
Yeah, like I mean, I get it that they're doing a lot of crime, but if you speak to the guerrillas in the mountains or the jungle or whatever, I've seen interviews, like they certainly are pretty ideological. They're not idiots, and they're not like pretending, you know what I mean? There must be, when they say like, let's go and attack this outpost, like why? What do they think they're doing? Like fighting the government, or like destroying capitalism, or...
Yeah, it's definitely, there is some ideology to it. I mean, there's also some people who are recruited as like basically children, and they're kind of just indoctrinated into it. So obviously there is a Marxist ideology. I'm not sure so much that they're trying to overthrow the government entirely anymore. That was the previous goal, but it seems now like the Colombian guerrillas in general, their like stated goals is related to specific issues, like specific social change, support of like labor movements or indigenous movements, at least in what they're claiming anyway. Also kind of just calling out the assassination of like social leaders throughout all of Colombia. They've been calling kind of like a genocide of social leaders that's been going on as a result of like the ongoing violence.
But I read as well that a lot of the former FARC who have like, you know, decided to go peaceful are then being killed by, to be honest, like mysterious paramilitaries. I mean, do you know much about that?
Yeah, so it's basically just like a paramilitary phenomenon, really. So it's not really like a singular group that's attacking. It's just like part of it's localized, part of it's just criminal groups that have ties with local elites, people who just want to take revenge, that sort of thing. Same thing with the social leaders. It's just like criminal or paramilitary groups who have ties with local elites who want to get rid of like these human rights activists or like indigenous community leaders who are posing a problem to them. So that's how they get eliminated. And there's also something you might find interesting. There's this group, or maybe rather more accurately a label, called the Águilas Negras, or the Black Eagles. So it's kind of this paramilitary, like I guess label, like I said, that are just going around threatening like human rights activists and like political opposition leaders, like members of the opposition party, just like using that as a threat.
And there are right-wing paramilitaries as well still there, no?
Yeah, there is still. So basically the AUC, which was the Autodefensas Unidas de Colombia, they were the kind of this umbrella group of the largest paramilitary groups that operated like in the 90s and early 2000s. They had disbanded under under Álvaro Uribe in 2006. However, some of the groups that disbanded still maintain their ties to drug trafficking organizations and stuff. So they continue doing those kind of work and continue to be like criminal paramilitary groups without like the official support that they had from some parts of the government and some parts of the military, but those ties are still remaining with a lot of like the local government officials or local landlord elites and stuff like that. The largest groups would be the largest paramilitary group. It's known as Clan del Golfo, or they also call themselves the Autodefensas Gaitanistas de Colombia, and they're also known as the Urabeños. They go by several names. So they're the largest paramilitary group, and they have a presence throughout Colombia in various different parts.
Why then, if, you know, it sounds like the FARC and the ELN are like pretty similar, why do they hate each other basically? I know they're at the minute that they're maybe going to form this thing, but historically they've been against each other. And I know the ELN are like quite extreme, right? They were even more extreme than FARC.
Yeah, in some ways they are more ideological. They have a more ideological background. They were formed by like middle class intellectuals and by like Catholic liberation theology priests like Camilo Torres. Basically, they kind of inspired by the Cuban Revolution and trying to implement that same model in Colombia in the 1960s. And other groups had formed, like the EPL, which is a smaller group in Catatumbo. They're a Maoist group, although they kind of disbanded in the 90s, but a major faction of them still remained and it's continued thriving. So there's a lot of like, it's not just ideological differences per se, but it's a lot of it like political and like criminal rivalries as well, just between the different organizations. Like there's been a lot of conflict between the ELN and the EPL in Catatumbo, like in recent years.
Right. And since this dissident group said like, yeah, we're going to go back to war, has there been attacks? Have there been any, you know, has there been anything to show that like they're serious?
Yeah, so it hasn't been a major like wave of like FARC dissidents, like new former members who are just like abandoning the peace process entirely and going into the mountains and like joining these dissident groups. We haven't really seen that yet, at least. I think the main purpose of like that video and kind of that announcement was kind of just to bring the existing FARC dissident groups under Ivan Marquez and his group's command. So as far as attacks from the FARC, more than usual, I don't think so, though the Colombian government has increased its actions against FARC dissidents, kind of showing like the FARC members who are still compliant with the FARC peace deal, they don't leave the peace deal, or this is what's going to happen to you. So that's been increased in terms of military operations against FARC dissidents.
Right. And what was the idea for the FARC fighters that quit? You know, the ones that stepped down and said like, yeah, okay, we agree, we're not going to fight anymore. How did they reintegrate into, you know, normal society, if you want? How did they come out of the jungle?
Yeah, so there is an entire, basically a process where they, you know, register into the Transitional Peace and Justice jurisdiction. It's GEP in Spanish, the acronym for that. Basically kind of just like giving some, kind of just gives them an opportunity to say like whatever war crimes or what they did during the war, and then they would get their sentence or get amnesty or whatever, and then disarm and go into these reintegration camps where they would basically just live off kind of separately. Also, the FARC as a group became a political party with guaranteed representation within Congress for at least several years until I guess they get whatever political base they can or need. So yeah, that's more or less what has been implemented in order to get these FARC members out of the guerrilla, out of the mountains, and into like reintegrating them into society.
And what do you think the government response will be to this, you know, this new faction saying that they're going back to war?
Overall, I think they're probably, Duque is probably going to continue trying to be, I guess, a bit heavy-handed against the FARC.
Wait, sorry, when you say heavy-handed, like how so? What was he doing? Like killing everyone?
Like carrying out increased military operations, just like bombing multiple members of the FARC dissident groups in different parts of Colombia. Also, earlier this year, there was like a report from the Colombian military, basically saying like just increase the number of casualties without and start like give less regards for like who you're targeting. So that can also really cause a lot of concerns for like human rights abuses and collateral damage to civilians. So we will probably see more of that overall, and also kind of like the escalating tensions with Venezuela could also see like an increased reaction against like the FARC or ELN guerrillas in Colombia.
And why did this specific group decide that like they were going to kind of, you know, take the bull by the horns and go back? Like, I know you explained who these leaders were, but was there anything that kind of broke the camel's back for them?
I'm not sure it's any particular issue. I guess there's some allegations that, you know, they were also being investigated for their criminal activities that they were involved in. So that would have been a major incentive for them to go back to guerrilla warfare. But at the same time, these were also like a lot of the major leaders who helped negotiate the peace deal, like in their terms. So as far as like their accusations that the Colombian government has entirely like betrayed the FARC peace deal and that there's no choice but to go to arms, that's not really true, I would say. But there has definitely been some issues with Ivan Duque and his views of the peace deal, and that definitely sparks concerns.
And how big are FARC? Like, do we have any idea what kind of numbers they're at these days? So
it was about 13,000 members who disarmed, who were part of the peace deal, and the majority of them are still complying with it, like over 90% of them. However, there's something, like estimates suggest there's somewhere between like 2,000 to 3,000 FARC dissidents active in Colombia. There's about 31 different FARC groups. Estimates obviously vary depending on like the different sources, and it's never going to be precise. The ELN has something like 2,500 total fighters, although they also employ a lot more people like along the Colombian-Venezuelan border. It's been reported that along that border, Colombian guerrillas in general employ up to 15,000 people, like for different illicit activities, not just for fighters. So, and they've also been increasingly recruiting from Venezuela, including like child soldiers and like children who drop out of high school, and they've been able to reach out to like the schools and use radio stations, kind of just communicate their ideology and recruit youths who a lot of them don't have many economic opportunities otherwise, and joining a guerrilla that provides for their well-being and gives them like a cause to fight for is something that they would probably see as attractive.
Yeah, it's kind of same old story all over the world, man. Ross, is there anything else you wanna say about this situation that you think we haven't covered yet?
Yeah, I mean, it's been, like I said, there is increasing escalation between the Colombian government and the Venezuelan government, and now it appears like we're seeing like a development of proxy warfare. Like I recently wrote about, the Venezuelan government was already involving Colombian guerrilla groups as kind of a paramilitary strategy of like employing non-state actors to work on its behalf. But that's starting to appear that it's becoming more of an international issue, more of a proxy warfare issue that will become an increasingly difficult challenge to deal with as tensions continue to escalate between Colombia and the United States and Venezuela.
Is Venezuela actually training FARC like inside Venezuela?
So I've actually found allegations that the FARC were training like members of like colectivo groups of like paramilitary groups in Venezuela. So it's more like the other way around.
Yeah, it would make sense because they have more experience, I guess, like after being in the jungle.
Absolutely. So they have a lot more experience with guerrilla warfare and with fighting like a superior military. So that's definitely something that's very advantageous for the Venezuelan government, especially in the advent if there is an invasion. Not that I think that situation is likely, but that's something that they hype up a lot, and something that is obviously something they take into deep consideration, not just propaganda-wise. So that's kind of like a major deterrent, just being able to conduct that kind of guerrilla warfare, and also like to train Venezuelan loyalists to the government in those kind of tactics. And additionally, they also have like all the ties to like transnational criminal networks. They have the know-how, so that's also incredibly useful for like corrupt Venezuelan government officials who are deeply involved in the drug trade.
Do you have any idea of how much volume they shift, the FARC from the jungles to, I guess the rest of the world? It's mostly cocaine as well, right? It's got to be almost all cocaine.
Yeah, it's mostly cocaine. Yeah, I don't have an exact number of the exact tons now, although really like in past few years, the amount of overall drug trafficking and Colombian cocaine production has increased despite efforts of like dismantling the FARC and trying to get people away from it. So it's been increasing. Like maybe in the past year there's been a slight decrease, but it's still going strong.
Right. And how is it the military haven't been able to dislodge them? Is it just because like the terrain and guerrilla warfare or what?
Yeah, it's the terrain is definitely a major obstacle for them, and it's just limited resources in general. It's just difficult to deal with. It's like I said, the Colombian government's never been able to fully control all of its territory, so it's just an ongoing part of its history. And
it's fascinating, man.
Yeah.
All right, Ross, if people want to follow your work, and get in touch with you and talk to you about the FARC or whatever, where can they do that?
Yeah, so I'm on Twitter. My handle is rdayt_. I couldn't get my full name, unfortunately, on there, but yeah, you can follow my work. I tweet sporadically at times. Sometimes I'm more active than others, but like any major like publications or like podcasts or anything I find interesting, I'm definitely sharing on there. So yeah, feel free to follow me. Appreciate it.
All right, man. Thank you very much, man.
Okay, thanks for having me.
That was Ross Dayton speaking about Colombia paramilitary groups and how FARC is going back to war. If you like what we're doing here at Popular Front, this is all grassroots. Please do consider subscribing on the Patreon, patreon.com/popularfront. For a very small amount of money, $5 a month, $10 a month, whatever you want, you can get bonus episodes, access to the Discord, all sorts of stuff there. Patreon.com/popularfront. Also, we have new merchandise in the shop, and we have an actual URL now. So if you go to www.popularfront.shop, you can see all the merchandise there. Got patches, t-shirts, we're selling the private suite poster, all sorts of stuff there. Definitely check that out. Also, we're moving forward with the 10k campaign, as I mentioned at the start. Thank you very much if you've been a part of that. We've got 7 days left when this goes out, and we are something like 70% towards the end. So hopefully we'll make it. If not, it doesn't matter. Like I said, we wanted to get 5 to 10. We're already on about 7 grand, so that's just like already amazing. So thank you very much. But please do consider sharing it and supporting us if you can. And you can support there with as little as £5. If you go to popularfront.co/10k, like 10k, you'll find a link to the Indiegogo campaign where you can support us. This episode was sponsored by the Defense Post, defense with an S, defensepost.com. Check them out. Also, follow us on Instagram, instagram.com/popular.front. We're getting absolutely battered by the Instagram stupid algorithm. We're getting like loads of the posts are getting taken down. They're threatening to ban us. We've had 3 strikes. So I don't know, the Instagram account might get banned. We have a backup, which is at popularfront.co. So you can follow us on the backup as well. But it's a nightmare, man. Like, it's such bullshit. Like, we have 10,000 followers on the Instagram, all organically, you know, no bullshit. And I applied for a verification badge to try and stop so much of our content getting deleted and, you know, getting all these strikes. Now, Instagram wrote back to me and said, no, the channel isn't big enough, we can't give you the verification. Now, here's how I know that's bullshit. When I worked at Vice News had a little fucking corporate deal with Instagram and sent an email around to every reporter on Vice News saying, if you want your Instagram account verified, send us your details. Now, the whole team got fucking verified. I didn't. At the time, I was like, fuck it, like, I don't care. Like, I don't even have a personal Instagram account now anyway. But, so the whole team got verified. Now, you know, a few of my friends that were there have like 1,000 followers on Instagram and are verified. So now Instagram is suddenly telling me that Popular Front with 10,000 followers is not worthy of verification because it's not big enough. Well, that's bullshit, as I've just pointed out. Now, it's not about followers and that. My point is, like, again, if you just try and start your own thing, do grassroots, do what you're trying to do independently, as the internet was originally great for, now you're just getting fucked. Corporations are absolutely sucking the life out of independent creation, you know, and fuck them. That's why we started Popular Front. So yeah, support us, patreon.com/popularfront. Also, if you go to YouTube, subscribe to our YouTube. That's youtube.com/popularfront. What I've started doing is putting up all the podcast episodes. I put like 1 or 2 up a day because it just takes so fucking long to render on my MacBook. But yeah, you know, I realize a lot of people watch or listen to podcasts on YouTube and that. So yeah, if you go there, you'll see the podcast episodes, all of our video content as well, you know, the raw footage of the clashes in Greece, our latest dispatch from Syria, our documentary about the Ukrainian anarchists, our documentary from the bog side in Derry in Northern Ireland. We've got a lot going on there. youtube.com/popularfront. Also, be sure to go to our website, popularfront.co. If you want to show someone what Popular Front is, the website is probably the best way, popularfront.co. And also on our Twitter, twitter.com/popularfrontco. And mine is Jake_Hanrahan, HANRAHAN. Thank you very much to the following Patreons. Without you, this would not be possible. Thank you to Adam Berg-Snyder, Axel Iverson, Brian McLaughlin, Callum Ross, Chad Walker, Christina Rivetti, Christopher Martin, Dan Dunham, Daniel Shearer, David Gilmore, Diana Gorvanek, E. Louise Larson, Emiliano, Emily Molly, Fletcher Tate, Jack Mayhoff, the comedian, James from the Discord, Joanne Stocker, Joel Tambusi, Josh, Juan Hernandez, Kay Hardy Roberts, Kyle N. Payne, Lawrence Abrahams, LH, Lee Kamadik, another comedian, Margaret Bowling, Moody Al Rashid, Nate Van Dor, Noah, Nobody, wait, no, that's Ari, Patrick Bronte, Peter McCormack from What Bitcoin Did, Cubal, Russia al-Aqida, Jesus Christ, I can't even speak today. Russia al-Aqidi, Russia al-Qaeda, Jesus Christ, get cancelled for that. Sorry, Russia. Rohan Obari, Ryan Sandercock, Scartoon Music, Sebastian from the Discord, Sarushe Hawazi, Stephen Davila, Teddy, Tom Lochrin, Tony Bin, and Vida Provost. Thank you very much. Oh, and Zachary Hinch as well. Sorry, that's at the end now. Yep. Thank you very much. Like I said, if you want to support us, patreon.com/popularfront. I've heard people say that there is, and this isn't me just bullshitting, I swear, people have said that the amount you get on the Popular Front Patreon for the money is like one of the best. You know, there's some people that don't update their Patreon for months. Every month we got new bonus episodes. There's something always going up there. So yeah. Also, you can subscribe to our email newsletter. We put some stuff out there that doesn't really go anywhere else, to be honest. We don't update it that often, but you know, we do put bits up there. It's the Popular Front special delivery newsletter. It's called, what is it? popularfront.substack.com. Yeah. Music in this episode, the intro was by Home, and as always the outro was by my mate Sam Black. Find his music at soundcloud.com/son-of-old.